Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's spoilers for Monday, April 6th. Episode of The Young and the Restless indicate that Jack Abbott might make a poor decision once again, and that Claire Newman is unaware of a growing danger. A plethora of events will transpire in Genoa City as Holden Novak is expected to reply to Kane Ashby's proposition. Now that Kane needs Holden's help going after Victor Newman, Y&R may resume their chat at Crimson Lights. Holden must weigh the benefits and drawbacks before deciding whether or not to engage in underhanded tactics against a powerful man in town. Since Claire would be opposed to Holden going after her grandpa, she should be considered. Holden may have an even harder time making a choice if Kane intends to manipulate Claire for intelligence. However, Kane is prepared to compensate Holden generously for his efforts. Will Holden be swayed enough to join this Victor takedown plot after that? Whatever the case may be, Claire will be left in the dark regarding the conversation between Holden and Kane as she considers a significant decision on her own. As Claire struggles to decide whether to assist her parents and Victor at Chancellor, Victoria Newman may have some words of wisdom to offer. At the GCAC, Jack may opt to approach Diane Jenkins Abbott after catching her notice. It'd definitely be preferable to keep giving Diane time and space, but Jack may not be able to resist delivering a contrite plea in person. That strategy could backfire horribly since Diane is nowhere near ready to forgive Jack. Diane won't want to hear Jack's justifications and may hammer him with everything she's got again. Jack might lean on Kyle Abbott in the aftermath, but Kyle could also help with some vengeful pondering. Although Jack doesn't have a clear plot in place yet, he clearly wants Victor to pay for blowing up his marriage. The Young and the Restless spoilers indicate Victor could have unsettling news coming at him from various directions soon. Young and the Restless. Next 3 weeks Y&R comings and goings March 30th to April 3rd. Villains comeback. Heroine's unhappy return plus more Y&R 2026 spoilers. Exciting new Beyond the Gates spoilers. Y&R early week spoilers April 6th to 10th. Matt's mayhem. Patty pushes. Tessa's opportunity. Subscribe to Celebrating the Soap's newsletter. Victor Newman's promise. There will also be Victor, who honors a promise. It sounds like Victor is going to spend the rest of his days making Kane Ashby pay. So, does Victor already have a plan to strike? Or could this objective be towards someone else? Once Nikki Newman finally hears all the truth about that night on the yacht, she will be even more upset with Victor. There is a significant risk that despite Victoria and Claire's concerns, Nikki would grow obsessed with teaching her estranged spouse a lesson that might have everyone in the Newman family being compelled to select sides. Will they side with Victor or join Nikki? Which narrative are you looking forward to witnessing the most on Friday, April 3rd, 2026? Share your opinions in the comment area below. Remember to keep watching the soap on CBS or Paramount Plus to find out what happens next. Love Young and Restless? Join our official Young and Restless Facebook group for daily spoilers, recaps, breaking news, and exclusive updates. Jump into heated discussions with fellow soap lovers who enjoy the drama as much as you do. The Young and the Restless spoilers for Thursday, April 2nd, reveal some bombshells up next in Genoa City. Phyllis Summers calls Lily Winters out, while someone defends their dad's activities. Plus, the hunter suddenly becomes the hunted. What's on the horizon for Thursday? Time to find out. 5 key takeaways. Phyllis stirs the pot as she calls out Lily for her hypocrisy. Victoria seeks a means to defend Victor's previous acts. As Nick is on the quest for Matt, his enemy turns the tables on him and gets closer to locating him in Vegas. Read spoilers for the last episode of Y&R. Dangerous Spiral, Big Opportunity, Embracing Spider. Read spoilers for Y&R. Week of April 6th. Enraging discoveries, risky betrayals, and problematic pot stirs. Phyllis Summers stirs the pot. The Young and the Restless spoilers for Thursday, April 2nd. Predict that Phyllis will run into Lily and lay into her. Can anyone blame Phyllis? While the entire community judges the woman for stealing Newman Enterprises from beneath the Newman family, Lily hasn't exactly been innocent these past few weeks either. After all, she had Kane Ashby believing she and the twins were kidnapped by Victor Newman, all in hopes of preserving Chancellor Industries. Lily has lashed out at Kane for his Aristotle Dumas charade, but what Lily did scaring not just Kane but Devin Hamilton Winters and her cousin Nate Hastings, is hypocritical and immoral. What will Lily's response be to Phyllis? Victoria Newman defends her daddy speaking of awful deeds. Victoria Newman will defend her father's behavior. Victor Newman hasn't played nice throughout this entire affair, and had he not stolen Kane's AI program, he wouldn't be in this situation. On top of that, he faked Lily's kidnapping, but then ended up kidnapping Jack Abbott for real. Who does Victoria defend Victor to? And does she have a leg to stand on? Sure, Victor wants his firm back, but breaking laws and families up along the road is awful behavior. Related links: The Young and the Restless, next 3 weeks YNR weekly comings and goings YNR 2026 spoilers, exciting new Beyond the Gates spoilers, The Young and the Restless spoilers. Passion erupts for these 3 former couples. Anger turns to lust? Subscribe to Soap Opera Spy newsletter Nick Newman's On the Hunt. Lastly, The Young and the Restless spoilers for April 2nd reveal that as Nick Newman attempts to track Matt Clark down, Matt will grow closer to locating Nick. It sounds like the hunter is suddenly becoming the hunted. How is Matt always 2 steps ahead of Nick and all the Newmans? It also doesn't help that Nick is getting pills/drugs supplied to his hotel suite and asking questions about Matt. So maybe those 2 drug traffickers know more than they are letting on. Are you thrilled about Thursday's show? Join the conversation below. Watch YNR every day to see all the action in Genoa City and visit this site often for the best Young and the Restless news, spoilers, and updates. Love The Young and the Restless? Join our official Young and Restless Facebook group for daily spoilers, recaps, breaking news, and exclusive updates. Jump into heated discussions with fellow soap lovers who enjoy the drama as much as you do. The tension had been building for weeks, though no one had openly acknowledged it. Beneath polite smiles and carefully chosen words, resentment simmered, waiting for the right moment to erupt. That moment finally arrived when Phyllis decided she'd had enough of Lily's quiet manipulations and subtle provocations. It began in a setting that was meant to feel relaxed, almost casual, but the air quickly turned sharp. Phyllis didn't bother with pleasantries. She had come prepared, her thoughts sharpened by days of frustration. Lily, on the other hand, appeared calm, almost too calm, as though she had anticipated this confrontation and rehearsed her responses. Phyllis opened with a direct accusation, her voice steady but edged with unmistakable anger. She questioned Lily's motives, implying that her recent actions were anything but innocent. Lily attempted to deflect, offering vague explanations and carefully measured denials, but Phyllis wasn't buying it. Every word Lily spoke seemed to fuel her further. "You think you're subtle," Phyllis essentially conveyed, "but you're not fooling anyone." Lily's composure faltered just slightly. For someone used to maintaining control, even a small crack was noticeable. She pushed back, suggesting that Phyllis was overreacting, perhaps even projecting her own insecurities. But Phyllis had anticipated this line of defense. She countered with specific examples, moments where Lily's behavior had crossed the line, instances that painted a clear picture of calculated interference. The conversation quickly escalated. Voices rose, and the underlying tension burst into full view. What had once been whispered concerns were now being spoken aloud with undeniable clarity. Lily, no longer able to rely on ambiguity, grew defensive. She insisted that her intentions had been misunderstood, that she had never meant to cause harm. Phyllis, however, wasn't interested in intentions. She was focused on impact. The confrontation reached its peak when Phyllis laid everything bare, accusing Lily of deliberately undermining others to advance her own position. It was a bold claim, one that left little room for interpretation. Lily stood frozen for a moment, caught between indignation and the realization that she had been seen through. The fallout from this exchange didn't remain contained. Word spread quickly, as it always does, and soon others began to take sides. Some sympathized with Phyllis, appreciating her willingness to speak the truth. Others felt that she had gone too far, that her approach had been unnecessarily aggressive. Amid this growing divide, another figure stepped forward, someone whose presence shifted the dynamic entirely. The so-called daddy defense came into play, altering the balance of power in ways no one had fully anticipated. He entered not with anger, but with authority. His loyalty was clear, and it was directed firmly toward Lily. Where others had questioned her actions, he offered justification. Where others had seen manipulation, he framed it as strategy. His defense wasn't just protective. It was assertive, almost confrontational. He challenged Phyllis directly, questioning her motives and suggesting that her accusations were rooted in jealousy rather than truth. The implication was clear. Phyllis wasn't exposing wrongdoing. She was creating drama. This intervention complicated matters significantly. What had been a two-sided conflict now became a broader struggle over perception and influence. The daddy defense didn't just shield Lily. It reframed the narrative, casting doubt on Phyllis's credibility. Phyllis, however, refused to back down. If anything, this development strengthened her resolve. She saw the defense not as a sign of Lily's innocence, but as further proof of the network of support that enabled her behavior. In her eyes, this wasn't just about one person, it was about a pattern, a system that allowed certain actions to go unchecked. The confrontation took on a new intensity. Phyllis found herself not only defending her original claims, but also pushing back against attempts to discredit her. She stood firm, reiterating her points and refusing to be intimidated. Meanwhile, Lily regained some of her composure under the protection of her defender. With someone else speaking on her behalf, she was able to step back slightly, observing the conflict as it unfolded. Yet this apparent advantage came with its own risks, because as the defense grew stronger, so did the scrutiny. Others began to question why such a forceful defense was necessary. If Lily's actions were truly harmless, why did they require such a vigorous justification? The more her defender spoke, the more attention he drew, not just to himself, but to the situation as a whole. Gradually, the focus began to shift. What had started as Phyllis versus Lily evolved into something more complex. The defender's involvement introduced new tensions, new questions, and new lines of conflict. His attempts to control the narrative inadvertently opened the door for others to challenge it. This marked the beginning of a subtle but significant transformation, the moment when the hunter began to become the hunted. At first, the shift was almost imperceptible. Small doubts emerged, quiet conversations that hinted at unease. People who had initially accepted the defense at face value began to reconsider. They started to examine the details more closely, to question the assumptions that had been presented to them. Phyllis, sensing this change, adjusted her approach. She became less confrontational and more strategic, allowing the inconsistencies to reveal themselves rather than forcing the issue. Instead of pushing harder, she stepped back just enough to let others see what she had been pointing out all along. Lily, meanwhile, found herself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The protection she had relied on was still there, but it no longer felt as secure. The very attention that had once shielded her was now exposing her to greater scrutiny. Her defender, too, began to feel the pressure. The more he insisted on controlling the narrative, the more resistance he encountered. His confidence, once unwavering, started to show signs of strain. Questions he couldn't easily dismiss began to surface, challenging his authority and his assumptions. The dynamic had shifted. Now, instead of Phyllis being on the defensive, it was Lily and her protector who were being questioned. The roles had reversed in a way that no one could have predicted at the outset. The turning point came during a moment of unexpected clarity. A detail, small but significant, came to light, one that contradicted the narrative that had been so carefully constructed. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, but it was enough to tip the balance. Suddenly, the defense that had seemed so strong began to unravel. Phyllis didn't need to say much at this stage. The groundwork she had laid earlier was now bearing fruit. Others began to connect the dots, to see the pattern that she had described. What had once seemed like isolated incidents now appeared as part of a larger picture. Lily, faced with this growing realization, struggled to maintain her composure. The calm confidence she had displayed earlier gave way to visible discomfort. Her responses became less measured, more reactive. The control she had once wielded so effectively was slipping away. Her defender attempted to regain control, but the situation had changed too much. His words no longer carried the same weight. Instead of reinforcing the narrative, they seemed to highlight its weaknesses. The hunter had indeed become the hunted. What followed was not a dramatic collapse, but a gradual unraveling. The alliances that had once supported Lily began to weaken. Some distanced themselves quietly, unwilling to be associated with the growing controversy. Others spoke out more openly, adding their voices to the emerging consensus. Phyllis, having sparked the initial confrontation, now found herself in a very different position. She was no longer the lone voice challenging the status quo. Instead, she had become part of a broader movement toward accountability. Yet even in this moment of apparent vindication, there was a sense of complexity. The situation was not black and white, and the consequences were not entirely satisfying. While the truth, or at least a version of it, had come to light, it had done so at a cost. Relationships had been strained, trust had been broken, and the dynamics of the group had been fundamentally altered. The resolution, such as it was, left behind a mixture of relief and unease. Lily, now facing the consequences of her actions, was forced to confront a reality she had long avoided. Whether she would learn from the experience or attempt to rebuild her position remained uncertain. Her defender, too, was left to reckon with his role in the situation. His intentions may have been rooted in loyalty, but the outcome had exposed the limitations and dangers of unquestioning support. In the days that followed, the atmosphere didn't return to normal, at least not in any genuine sense. On the surface, things appeared calmer. Conversations resumed, routines reestablished themselves, and people carried on as though the storm had passed. But beneath that fragile calm, everything had changed. There was a new awareness in the room whenever certain names were mentioned. A hesitation, a calculation. People were no longer as quick to trust what they saw or heard. The confrontation between Phyllis and Lily had done more than expose a personal conflict. It had peeled back the illusion that everything was stable and predictable. Phyllis, despite having gained validation, didn't feel triumphant. If anything, she seemed more reserved. Those who expected her to revel in being proven right were surprised. She spoke less, observed more. It wasn't fear that quieted her, it was understanding. She had seen how quickly narratives could shift, how easily people could be swayed, and how costly it was to challenge something deeply embedded. Winning the argument hadn't erased the damage. It had simply revealed how deep it ran. Still, her silence didn't mean disengagement. She was watching, carefully, deliberately, not out of paranoia, but out of awareness. She knew now that influence didn't disappear overnight. It adapted. It waited. Lily, on the other hand, was navigating unfamiliar territory. For someone who had once moved with quiet confidence, she now seemed more cautious, almost guarded. Every word she chose carried weight. Every interaction felt measured. But beneath that caution was something more complicated than simple regret. There was frustration at being exposed, at losing control, at no longer being able to operate in the same way she once had. She wasn't used to being questioned. She wasn't used to being watched. And perhaps most unsettling of all, she wasn't used to uncertainty. For the first time, Lily couldn't fully predict how others would respond to her. The subtle cues she once relied on, the nods, the affirmations, the unspoken agreements, were no longer guaranteed. People were thinking for themselves now, drawing their own conclusions. That shift, more than anything, unsettled her. Her defender also underwent a transformation, though his was less visible at first. Outwardly, he maintained his stance, still projecting confidence, still standing by his earlier assertions. But the certainty behind his words had diminished. He found himself second-guessing, not necessarily his loyalty, but his judgment. Had he misread the situation? Had his intervention helped? Or had it made things worse? These questions lingered, unspoken but persistent. What troubled him most was not the criticism from others, but the subtle distance that had begun to form between him and those he had once easily influenced. People still listened, but not in the same way. There was a filter now, a layer of skepticism that hadn't existed before. He wasn't used to that either. As time passed, the ripple effects of the conflict continued to spread in unexpected ways. Smaller disagreements began to surface. Issues that might once have been ignored or smoothed over were now being addressed directly. People were less willing to let things slide. In some ways, this was a positive change. There was more honesty, more accountability. But it also meant more tension. Without the unspoken agreements that had previously kept things in check, conflicts became more visible, more frequent. The group was evolving, whether it wanted to or not. Phyllis noticed this shift and wrestled with mixed feelings. On one hand, she believed this was necessary, that confronting uncomfortable truths was the only way forward. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the strain it placed on everyone involved. Change, she realized, wasn't clean. It didn't happen neatly or without consequence. It disrupted, unsettled, and forced people to adapt in ways they might not have chosen. And yet, there was no going back. One evening, in a quieter moment away from the larger group, Phyllis and Lily found themselves in the same space again. This time, there was no audience, no raised voices, no immediate tension. Just silence, heavy but not hostile. For a long moment, neither spoke. When Lily finally broke the silence, her tone was different. Less defensive, less controlled. "I didn't expect things to turn out like this," she admitted. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it wasn't a denial either. Phyllis studied her carefully, searching for the familiar signs of deflection or manipulation. But what she saw instead was something more complex, someone trying, perhaps for the first time, to navigate a situation without relying on the strategies that had once worked so well. "That's the thing about truth," Phyllis replied quietly. "You don't get to control where it goes." Lily let that sink in. For once, she didn't have a counterargument ready. That moment didn't resolve everything. It didn't erase the past or magically rebuild trust. But it marked a shift, a small, significant one. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding. Meanwhile, the defender faced his own reckoning. In a separate conversation with someone he trusted, he was forced to confront the possibility that his loyalty had blinded him. "You weren't wrong to stand by her," he was told. "But maybe you didn't ask enough questions." That distinction mattered. Loyalty, he realized, wasn't the same as certainty. Defending someone didn't require ignoring the truth. If anything, it required a deeper commitment to it. This realization didn't come easily, and it didn't immediately change his behavior. But it planted a seed, one that would continue to grow over time. As weeks turned into months, the intensity of the original conflict faded, but its impact remained. The group had settled into a new equilibrium, one defined not by blind trust, but by cautious awareness. Phyllis became a quieter presence, but a respected one. When she spoke, people listened not out of fear, but because they knew she didn't speak lightly. Lily began the slow process of rebuilding, not just her reputation, but her approach. Whether driven by necessity or genuine reflection, she started to engage more openly, with less reliance on subtle maneuvering. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start. And the defender? He learned to balance his instincts with reflection. He still stood by those he cared about, but with a greater willingness to question, to listen, to adapt. In the end, the story didn't conclude with a clear victory or defeat. Instead, it settled into something more realistic, growth, imperfect and ongoing. The hunter had become the hunted, yes, but more importantly, everyone involved had been forced to confront themselves. And that, perhaps, was the most lasting consequence of all.